His thanksgiving. His thanksgiving. Sometimes we don't think about it. We just think about Thanksgiving as one word and as a holiday, and we get off work and get to eat and watch the game. But it comes from the words thanks and giving, or you can interchange those, giving thanks. As I told you a moment ago, let's give thanks. That's something some people say at the meal. You might not know where it came from. It's nowhere in the Bible until Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then you'll hear Jesus, he's the one that started that. Every time when he broke bread, it said he gave thanks. So it came from Jesus himself trying to teach us that even daily provision is from God, that it's all from the Father, and we should live a life of thanksgiving. And if we're going to live in his presence, we've got to develop a life of thanksgiving, not a holiday a year, but giving thanks every day, being a grateful person. So let me show you Luke chapter 17. Look at verse 11. Now it happened as he went to Jerusalem that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. And then as he entered a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off. They had to stand afar off, by the way, because of the law. And they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So when he saw them, he said to them, go show yourselves to the priest. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned, and with a loud voice glorified God, and fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. Giving thanks. And he was a Samaritan. So Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, arise, go your way. Your faith has made you well. So let me show you a few things about this passage. And we're talking again about living in his presence and about worship. So number one, worship is giving thanks. If you want a very simple definition of worship, worship is giving thanks. Verses 15 and 16 again in Luke 17, we'll stay there through the whole message. One of them, when he saw he was healed, returned and with a loud voice, glorified God and fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. Worship is all about thanking someone after you've received something. That's really what worship is. Worship is that you've received something from God, so you want to give him thanks. You want to express your gratitude to him. You want to express your love. And please hear me, that true, genuine love is always expressed. You might have grown up in a family that didn't express love, but you're in a new family now. You might have had a dysfunctional father, but you have a good father now. You have a really good father. And you can express your love to him because you have received something from God. Express your love. Just think about it. Love always has to be expressed. It's always expressed. Think about the first time you held hands with that special someone. You were expressing what you were feeling in your heart. You were expressing your love. This is all through Scripture. Now, I'm not trying to get everyone to express your love or your worship to God the same. I understand that we have different ways of expressing. This guy did it with a loud voice and fell at his feet. Very demonstrative. I think, though, when you think about it, it was totally appropriate for what he had just received. Wouldn't you agree? So we talk about worship as giving thanks. In the Old Testament, there are 11 Hebrew words for praise. Now, you'll hear 7 Hebrew words. That's because 7 are dominant. 7 are most commonly used. But let me show you these 7 words, though, and look for the words thanksgiving in the definition, or giving thanks, all right? Here are the 7 Hebrew words of praise that are most used in the Old Testament. Number 1, todah. Todah means a thanksgiving choir. That's the actual definition, a thanksgiving choir. And again, not the holiday, but a choir giving thanks, all right? Barak is the second one, means to kneel in thanksgiving, or to bow down. Many times it's translated bow. The third one is tehillah, to sing a song of thanksgiving. Now make sure you pronounce this one correctly. It's not tequila. Which it might cause you to sing a song afterwards, but okay, tehillah. The fourth one is halal. It means to give thanks by being clamorously foolish. Like that. To give thanks by being clamorously foolish. All right, and by the way, this is where we get our word hallelujah, from this Hebrew root. All right, the fifth one is yadah. It means to give thanks with extended hands, or to lift your hands in thanksgiving. Notice, are you seeing a pattern here? It's all about giving thanks. The sixth one is zamar. It means to give thanks with a musical instrument. And the seventh one is shabach, which means to give thanks in a loud tone. This is translated shout many times, shout to the Lord. This is the word, give a shabach to the Lord, all right? But here's the thing. Notice they're all about expressing our love, and they're all about giving thanks. Please hear me. You'll never be a worshiper if you're not grateful. Gratitude is what causes worship to come forth. By the way, there's a verse in the Bible that has 4 out of these 7 words in one verse. Let me read it to you. Psalm 100, verse 4. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving. That's the word todah, which means the thanksgiving choir. And into his courts with praise, tehillah, singing praises. Be thankful, yadah, which means extend your hands to him, and bless, barak, bow before his name. Let me now paraphrase it, put all the definitions in. Enter into his gates with a thanksgiving choir, and into his courts with singing praises. Extend your hands to him and bow before his name. Now, again, I'm not saying that we all need to do it the same way. We all have different personalities. But there are scriptural expressions of worship. Bowing is in the Bible. Shouting is in the Bible. Clapping is in the Bible. Extending your hands, lifting your hands. That's not a Pentecostal thing. That's a Bible thing. That's in the Bible. I remember, and we've all gone through this probably, and you may still be in this, and that's okay, but I remember the first time I lifted my hands in church. But I remember I was standing there, and this worship pastor, God bless him, this worship pastor said, let's all lift our hands to the Lord. So I was kind of looking around, I thought, everybody's doing it, so I did it. So I thought, okay. I remember thinking, everybody's looking at me. Everybody thinks I'm a charismatic now. But I remember that right there, and something in my heart flipped. And I remember thinking, I don't care what anybody thinks anymore. I don't care. I'm going to worship God. That's worship. That's giving thanks. Okay, so worship is giving thanks. So I want to worship God. So I need to give him thanks, which is gratitude. But is there something that causes gratitude? Is there something that precedes gratitude? So here's point number 2. Miracles precede gratitude. According to this passage right here, miracles precede gratitude. Look again at verse 15. And one of them, when he saw he was healed, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God. When he saw that he was healed. In other words, the reason he was grateful was because he just received a miracle from God. Okay. You say thank you after you've received something. When someone gives you a gift, what do you say? Thank you. That's what worship is. That's what worship is. It's just saying thank you. It's just giving thanks. Giving thanks. We come together, we give thanks. You get up in the morning, you give thanks. It's just giving thanks. Okay, this guy did it with a loud voice, and he fell down on his face at Jesus' feet. Now, question, was that appropriate? Yes. I think it was. See, we don't know a lot about leprosy. Leprosy is a disease. It's in essence like an autoimmune disease, but it's a bacteria that causes your digits to begin to waste away, your flesh begin to eat away at itself. If you had leprosy in the Bible, you could not associate with anyone else because they thought it was contagious. And it is somewhat contagious, but not as contagious as they thought for many, many years. So you had to live in a leper colony. You had to live with other lepers. You couldn't be a productive member of society. You couldn't hold a job. You couldn't have a career. You couldn't go to church. You couldn't live with your family. If you contracted leprosy after you had children, you could never go to your kids' ball games. You could never kiss your wife goodnight. And if anyone ever got too close to you, you literally had to shout, unclean. Unclean. So not only were you a physical outcast, but you were a social and religious outcast because they believed that the reason you had it was some judgment of God. People didn't want to get anywhere around you. So this man had leprosy. He had no hope. And Jesus healed him. So I want to ask you again, was it appropriate that he would fall down on his face and with a loud voice give thanks? Of course it was, right? So if you had a disease and Jesus healed you, would it be appropriate for you when we come together to express your thanks? Weren't we all healed of a disease called sin? And the wages of sin is death. So it's okay if you want to express your love to God. And it's completely appropriate. It's completely appropriate. Okay, so we know gratitude is worship. Worship is about being grateful. Gratitude comes from miracles. So this just the way my mind works, it works in a process. So is there something that can actually cause a miracle? That'd be pretty cool if something could spark a miracle in my life, right? Well, let me show you point number 3. Obedience precedes miracles. Now, I'm not saying that we earn them, but I just look at this. Look, verse 14. So when Jesus saw them, he said to them, "Go show yourselves to the priest." And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. They weren't cleansed when Jesus spoke. They were cleansed as they obeyed. As they did with it. Go show yourselves to the priest. Okay, they could have said, we're not healed yet. The law says that if we're healed, we go show ourselves to the priest. We're not healed. Because he didn't say, go show yourselves to the priest and you will be healed. Please notice that. He just said, go show yourselves to the priest. And as they obeyed, they were healed. Do you realize how much this pattern's in the Bible? He says to Moses, lift up your rod. Moses could have said, the army's right there. And God would have said, lift up your rod. You just do what I tell you to do. He told, when they got to the Jordan, when they were going to the promised land, he said, have the priest put their feet in the water. Now, you got to remember, it was at flood stage. And we don't think much about this, but we've seen on the news, we've seen rivers in flood stage, right? We've seen cars being carried downstream by rivers in flood stage. So the river was in flood stage. He said, put your feet in the water. They could have said, remember the Red Sea? We can probably find a stick and lift it up. And God, if you'll stop the water, then we'll walk through. But he said, no, put your feet in and I'll stop the water. This pattern's all through Scripture. I'm just saying, what's God telling you to do that you're not doing that could release a miracle in your life, which would release gratitude, which would release worship? Now, I love to do this, and I've told you many times, when you read a passage, read the context. So we're going to back up, and I'm going to show you the context before verse 11. I'm going to show you the first 10 verses, and you're going to see, if you've never seen it, it all goes together, all right? So he's going to talk first about offenses, the offender, and then he's going to talk about the offended. Let me show you. Luke 17, verse 1. And then he said to the disciples, it is impossible that no offenses should come. But woe to him through whom they do come. So he's talking to the offender now. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea than that he should offend one of these little ones. Okay, now he's going to start talking to the offended. Take heed to yourselves. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. And if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day returns to you saying, I repent, you shall forgive him. And the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. All right, now, before we go on to the next part, you just have to catch this. I'm telling you, most people have never caught this. Remember, they said, increase our faith. That's the 3 words they said, increase our faith. Okay, so here's what he said. Listen, guys, people are going to offend you. They're going to offend you, but I want you to forgive them. You understand? When someone offends you, forgive him. And here's what they probably did. They probably did something like this. Okay, we can do that. And he said, no, I'm not finished. If the same guy does the same thing 7 times on the same day, then you still forgive him. And they went like this. Yeah, we're going to need more faith. Do you see it? See, most people that get them never put verse 5 of that, increase our faith. Jesus said, if someone sins against you, forgive him. Okay, but if it's the same guy, same day, same thing, 7 times, still forgive him. Yeah, we're going to need more faith for that. You can't imagine how many people told me it takes faith to forgive. Listen to me very, very carefully. It does not take faith to forgive. It takes obedience. Watch. Okay, so they said, we need more faith. Watch his response, verse 6. So, in other words, because of what they just said, the Lord said, if you had faith as a mustard seed, in other words, just a little bit of faith, you can say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would, watch, obey you. And which of you, having a servant plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he comes in from the field, come at once and sit down and eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself, and serve me till I've eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded, not suggested, commanded him? I think not. So likewise, you, when you've done all those things which you are commanded, say we are unprofitable servants, we've done what was our duty to do. Now think about this. Jesus said, you need to forgive people. You just forgive them. And they said, we're going to need faith to do that. And here's what he said, you don't need faith, you need to do what you're told. That's what he just said. I know that's strong, but I didn't make up the Bible. Listen to that. They say, we're going to need faith for that. And he comes right back and says, does a servant get thanked because he did what he was commanded to do? I'm not saying if you're waiting on a miracle that you're in sin. I'm not saying that. We live in a fallen world. I've been there many times in my own life. But many, many times, the Lord's had to remind me of this passage. And I've had to think, what are you telling me to do? So we talked about this leper. Let's think about 30 years later. So Jesus says, go, show yourself to the priest. The guy's healed. He comes back with a loud voice, falls on his face, and glorifies God. Guy's doing great. And one day, he's walking down the street. And he sees Jesus. Would it still be appropriate to run up to him and to fall on your face and to say thank you? Would it still be appropriate then? All of us have something to be grateful for. God has done miracles in our lives. And here's what Satan's plan is. Satan's plan is to get our eyes off of what God's done. But just like that leper that was healed and he returned to give thanks to God. And Genesis 4, put a marker at Genesis 4. We'll get over there in a moment. And we're in a series called Living in His Presence. And this weekend, the title of the message is His Worship. His worship. We've been talking a lot about worship, how that relates to living in God's presence. And I want to talk to you about worship, what worship is and what it is not. And I want you to understand you were born a worshiper. You were born a worshiper. It's natural for you to worship. The question is not, are you a worshiper? The question is, what or whom do you worship? Because we all worship. And worship is not just singing. That can be worship, but people can sing and not worship. And we've done it. We've sung, and yet our mind was somewhere else. And that's not worship. Worship is not just exalting God. That's a part of worship and can be worship. But you need to understand that God did not create you to exalt Him. Please hear me. He had the angels to do that. The angels were doing it before creation. They're doing it right now. And according to Revelation, they do it for all eternity. They exalt God. Here's the reason I'm saying that. God did not create you because He needed someone else to exalt Him. So that's not what worship is. So I'm going to give you a definition of worship. And it's a short definition that hopefully you can remember. It's just two words. Worship is love expressed. Love expressed. And we're going to break down those two words here in a moment. But if it's love and it's not expressed, it's not worship. And if you express something, yet it's not love, it's not worship. Do you follow me? Worship is when we express our love to God. You were created to give and receive love from God. And let me go back to this. The angels weren't. The angels were not created to love God and be loved by God. Only you were. So worship is about love. That's what it's about. And it's expressing that love. One of our granddaughters, Willow, who's 6 years old right now, she did this back with her mother. I think she was playing or something, and now it's become like a game. She knows it's cute, so she does it. But when we'll say, Willow, I love you, she says, okay. Well, that's not the answer I want back, when I say I love you. So the other day I said to her, Willow, if you give me the correct answer, I'll give you some candy. I said, I love you. She said, I love you too, Papaw. So I got her to express her love. So, all right. So worship is love expressed. So I only have 2 points this weekend, and we're going to break down both words, all right? So here's point number 1. Worship is love. Worship is love. Now, I'm going to show you some scriptures in Deuteronomy 11, and I might shock you with this. But God actually commands us to love him. It's a command. Now, you might think, well, how could God command me to love him? Well, I don't have time to go into all of this, but I've shared this before, and it's a big thing to understand in marriage. Love is a choice. It's not something you fall in and out of. You choose to love. So the reason God can command you is because you have a choice. So he's commanding you to make the right choice for your benefit, by the way. So look at Deuteronomy 11, verse 1. Therefore you shall. This is like the Ten Commandments, using the word shall and shall not. You shall love the Lord your God and keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments always. Verse 13 of Deuteronomy 11. And it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commandments, which I command you today, now watch what he commands them today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Now, I know these Old Testament, I don't get hung up on that because when the New Testament confirms it, and the Old Testament's God's word too. But let me just show you how this is confirmed, not just by the New Testament, but by Jesus himself. Matthew 22, 35 through 38. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, and saying, Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. Now, we read Deuteronomy 11. He's not quoting Deuteronomy 11 there he's quoting Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. But the point is, Jesus, they said, what's the great commandment? He said, you shall love the Lord your God. That's the great one, and that's the first one. It's amazing. So, we're commanded to love God. But how do we love God? It's really simple. When you got saved, God gave you the ability to love him. You need to know this. God gave you a new heart so you could love him. He actually gave you a brand new heart, the seat of your emotions, so that you could love him. Look at this verse, Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart. Now this next phrase, really good promise to claim for your family. He will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants. Isn't that good? How would you like to claim that for your family? Okay, watch. What is he going to circumcise your heart to do? To love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. In other words, again, for your benefit. So, God gave you the ability to love him. But have you ever looked at someone and thought, I wish I loved God as much as he does, or as much as she does? I wish I loved God that much. You ever had that thought? You ever seen someone that, in your opinion, loves God more than you? And you have that thought, I wish I loved God that much. Okay? Well, why is this? I mean, how do we explain this? Well, let me tell you two things about love, all right? First of all, love leaks. Love leaks. In other words, your heart's full of love, and it can leak out. Let me give you an example. Marriage. Standing there at the altar, for better. Yeah, you don't mean that. Because when it gets worse, you get mad, right? Okay, so something can happen. Think about how love can leak. It's your heart. Satan, here's what Ephesians 6 says. He's shooting arrows at you. You know what he's trying to do? He's trying to punch a hole in your heart with a hurt, with an offense, with a judgment, with a lie. And so if he gets that arrow through, if you receive it, and you don't have to receive it because you can block every fiery dart, flaming arrow with the shield of faith. It says every one of them. But if you receive it, boom, you got a hole in your heart. And that can be in a relationship, or it can be with God. You can get mad at God. You can get disappointed at God. So love can leak. So that's one way you can say, well, that person seems to love God more than I do. Well, you need to see if there are any holes in your heart. Here's the second thing about love. Love grows. Love grows. Let me use the analogy of children. You're in the hospital. You've got that beautiful baby. You hold that baby for the first time. You don't think that you could love that baby anymore. Is that right? But you do, don't you? As that child grows up, your love grows for that child. You love that child more. Now, there are seasons you don't like them, but you love them. You get mad about something, you go through something, but you love them. See, love in our hearts can leak and it can grow. That's why it appears sometimes that we know my love for God is growing cold. That's when we press into God. That's when we're honest with him. That's when we say, God, I just don't feel what I used to feel. I'm telling you, it won't intimidate him for you to tell him that. He can do something about it. So first of all, worship is love. Here's number two. Worship is expressed. Worship is expressed. So if it's love and it's not expressed, it's not worship. Again, let me use an analogy of a marriage. If you're in a marriage and you never express your love, that's not a good marriage. See, it doesn't work, guys, just so you know. It doesn't work to say, well, I told you I love you 30 years ago, and if it changes, I'll let you know. Okay, that doesn't work. Love has to be expressed. And let me say it another way, so give us another word. Love expressed. Let me say it this way. Love communicated. Love communicated, which literally means that giving and receiving. Communicated. There's something that I'm doing. God created us to communicate with him. He created us to walk and talk with him in the garden. But sin came in the world. Now, if you're in Genesis 4, let me show you this. You may see a verse you've never seen before. Now, what I mean by that is many of us have read through the Bible, and some several times. But you've probably all had this happen to you. You read something and you think, I've never seen that verse before, right? Okay, that's the way God's word is, because it's infinite. Even though it's literally on pages, God's word's eternal. So let me show you a verse maybe you've never seen before to be the last part of the second verse we read, all right? Genesis 4, verses 25 and 26. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Now watch this phrase. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Lots of versions. Fun to read this version. That's when men first began to call on God. Here's one, New Living Translation. At that time, people first began to worship the Lord by name. It was during Enosh's lifetime that people first began to worship God. Now, again, I'm going to tell you something surprising. Remember, God created Adam and Eve, and they walked and talked with him every day until sin came. Every conversation, all you got to do is read Genesis 3 and 4. It's between Adam and Eve and then Cain with God. Every conversation after the fall was not initiated by people. Every conversation after the fall, until Genesis 4:26, when it says, then men begin to call on God, every conversation is the person, Adam and Eve or Cain, answering a question. Where are you? Who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree? Where is your brother? You remember what they asked Cain? Okay, every one of them. And so God asked him a question, and then he pronounces the judgment. And then Adam and Eve are driven out from the garden, the presence of God. Cain is driven out from the presence of God. And we think that this didn't, this just happened in a few years. But remember, they lived over 900 years back then. So at 900 years, and then you've got Seth lives over 900 years. Then he has a son named Enosh who lives over 900 years. But in Enosh's lifetime, Adam and Eve's grandson was the first time people began to call on God. People begin to call out. People begin to communicate with God. They begin to worship God. That's what we were created to do. Now, I have a real desire for men to worship God. That's a strong desire in my heart. So I want to talk about a little something here because we're talking about love expressed. And women express love easier than men. And love communicated. And women communicate easier than men. This is scientific fact. I mean, even the secular studies bear this out. I know there are men who are less verbal or more verbal, women who are less or more. I'm not talking about that. Let me tell you one study. Women learn and they communicate. Now listen, communicate by listening and talking. Now, all the ladies here are thinking, yeah, that's how you communicate. Listen and talk. Okay, but that's not how men communicate, and that's not how they learn. Men communicate by watching and doing. That's why they like shop class. They get to watch and do. That's why men like driving. They get to watch and do. Unless they have to listen to someone talk. I'm kidding. Sorry. Think about this. Jesus had 12 disciples and they were men. They were men. What did he say? Watch what I do, and then do what I do. That's the way he trained them. Now, you say, yeah, but he also told parables. That's because there were women there. And I'm going to prove it even further. What did the disciples do after he told a parable? What did that mean? Is that right? But the women knew what he meant. See, I'm telling you, I'm just helping you. Men do things together. And they're closer. Men go play golf, and they don't say 5 words. And they come home, and they're closer. But men, listen to me. You do communicate about whatever you're passionate about. And here's what I'm telling you. You say, well, I wish I were more passionate about God. Listen to me. This is the whole crux of the message. You do love God. Because God created you with the ability to love, and he created you with the ability to communicate. And you don't have to do it the same way your wife does. You don't have to. God didn't make you like a woman. He made you a man. Go, if you like the woods, go to the woods. And when the sun comes up, tell the Lord, that is a beautiful sunrise, Lord. And thank you that the sun has come up in my life. And just talk to him. And when we come together, worship him. And when you get up in the morning, worship him. And what is worship? Love expressed. Just express your love to him. That's one of the great things about church, not just watching it. And I know if you can't be here, I want you to watch online. But being here, you want to know why? Because you can express your love to God and others. Years ago, about 11 years ago now, my wife's father went to be with the Lord. And I preached his funeral service. He didn't talk much. He never talked much. Matter of fact, one of his favorite expressions was, they just use too many words. He said that one time when they got a new pastor. He just uses too many words. And I used to finish his sentences for him. I mean, he liked it that way too. He'd say to me, Robert, get your, I'd say, keys? Yeah. He'd say, let's go to Walmart? Yeah. And he'd say, we got to get some, and that was tough because Walmart has a lot of things. But he just didn't talk much. At his service, though, it was the largest church in that area, largest sanctuary, totally packed, people standing in the back, from a guy that didn't talk hardly at all. And they'd already told me this was going to happen, but I came out and sat on the stage, and then right after I came out, the back doors opened, and 11 state troopers came down the aisle and sat in the second row. And then they led his funeral procession. He was not in law enforcement. So I said to one of them, how do you know him so well? He said, because every time someone was stopped on the side of the road with car trouble, he was there. And I said, have you ever led a civilian's processional before? And they said, we never. We only lead government officials or state troopers, law enforcement. We've never led a civilian's, at least I never have, never ever led a civilian's procession before. I said, why did you lead his? That's what they said. Because he was the greatest public servant we've ever known. See, in his way, he expressed his love. I'm just asking you to learn to express your love to God. And I promise you, you will live in his presence. In my father-in-law's own way, he expressed his love to God and to other people. And I want to encourage you. You say, that's just not my personality like some people's personality. I understand that. I'm not trying to change your personality. But I want to encourage you to express your love to God. That's what worship is. Worship is expressing love to God. And when we express our love, it enhances our relationship. Just like a married couple, it does something